So this is gonna be the last video I do in this labor market sequence that is concentrated on the AFTRA strike that's taking place right now. And the last piece I want to look at, because the Screen Actors Guild and AFTRA actually they're on strike. And it has disrupted entertainment. But from a labor market perspective, and when we think about unions and this collective bargaining scenario and what unions try to do, I want to look at it through an economic lens. Now I'm going to do this by looking at 3 union models. And the last one is where I think we get the most value in terms of figuring out what AFTRA and SAG is trying to do. Earlier I told you, you have a derived demand for labor. You have lots of actors trying to sell their craft, their labor, okay? The market for entertainment, that labor market has a superstar effect, and the winners take all. If you're not deemed a winner, your earnings are not great in that market. And not only that, you only have a few studios, only a few buyers of a lot of the labor, which means the buyer, the studios, have a lot of market power. And because of that lot of market power, it allows them to actually manipulate or change wages. And I shouldn't say manipulate. It really is a firm acting rationally from a profit maximizing perspective. But that imbalance that exists with the market power causes wages to be lower than the competitive wage. Irrespective of the superstar effect, only a few individuals are earning astronomical amounts of income, while for most individuals in that market, it's not the case. So, how do we balance that? That's where the unions come in. Now, I'm going to do 3 markets. I'm going to do them fairly, 3 models for unions. I'm going to do them fairly quickly. And we're going to just focus on wages. Unions as collective bargaining units are not just focused on wages. They're also focused on working conditions. They have issues with efficiency and production and benefits. From the economic perspective right now, I'm going to focus on the wage piece. Their aim. Unions, their aim from a wage perspective is to increase wages, to make sure wages are actually close to the productive value or the marginal revenue product, or to create balance that exists when it comes to bargaining and figuring out wages. So 3 models. How do they get these higher wages? Here's the first model. I'm going to call it model number 1. And we're talking about, if you remember, we're talking about unions increasing wages. So what do they first do? What's the first model? Now remember, you're gonna help me out here, okay? Here is the labor market. That's the quantity of labor. This is the wage rate. Let's call it W. It's like any other market. You got demand for labor. That's the supply of labor. And this, let's call it W star. I want you to think. I know you can do this. I want you to think. If we want to get this wage higher, we want it to be W star because we're the union. SAG-AFTRA, they're asking for 11% increase. Okay? So we're the union. We want higher wages. What's one option to get this equilibrium wage higher? They could get the demand for labor to be higher. Let's call it DLW2. Notice the new equilibrium? Let's call it W2. You notice the wages went up? So one act or one model for unions is actually labor demand increase. They could get the demand for labor to be higher. How? Well, they'll have different strategies. It's lobbying, okay? Sometimes it's political lobbying. Sometimes it's time productive efficiency and making labor more productive, or the perception of labor to be more productive. Sometimes, remember, labor is a derived demand. Sometimes it's actually making the end product that the labor is producing to be more expensive. And if that is the case, you make the end product more expensive, you can get away with a higher demand and a higher wage. That's one effective way. Find a way, unions do this, to increase the demand for labor. Lobbying, okay, making the final product more attractive. So the businesses say, oh, I want more labor because now I'm getting something that's valuable from it. Okay, so that could happen also. And a productivity measure kind of tied to the labor. That's one way to get the wages higher. It works. So it could be a labor demand increase that unions use to get a higher wage. What else could they do? Okay, what else? Here's another thing they could do. I'm gonna put it over here. I move the camera a bit, but I'm gonna call it model number 2. Okay, still trying to increase the wage. Let's set it up. Here's the quantity of labor. Here's the wage rate. Here's the demand for labor. Supply of labor. That's our equilibrium. So one was the labor demand. What else could they do? If they want the wage to be higher, what else could they manipulate in the market? Well, they could restrict the supply of labor. Let's call it SL2. So make the labor less, the supply shift to the left. Here's the new equilibrium. Let's call it W2. Ta-da! So they could restrict supply. And this happens when they restrict the supply, shift to the left, and we see the wages higher. This is typical in a lot of craft industries. So let's say they put something in place where you need a special license, okay? You gotta join a particular membership so less people can actually be supplying the labor because you have to do these additional steps. So that happens, you could restrict the supply, okay? The American Medical Association, craft industries, in some cases you could have even a really closed shop where you have to be a member of the union. The point is, you could restrict the supply, and when you restrict the supply, you change the equilibrium to be higher. That's one other way. So you have the demand side, okay, and you also have the supply side. Now the final model I want to do, I think is one that I think resembles what's actually happening with the Screen Actors Guild and AFTRA strike. The third model I want to do for the union, I'm gonna explain exactly what's going on. So the third model is what we call an all-inclusive model. To be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of restricting supply to get the higher wage. That's me personally. But there can be ways that unions are all-inclusive and use that power of all of these laborers, all of these sellers of their labor, to collectively kind of sort of act as one entity and increase their own bargaining strength. Okay, it's what the unions, or what in economics is called an all-inclusive model. Rather than restrict supply, let everybody come together, kind of act as one entity. The same way the buyer has a lot of power, let us not negotiate as one individual unit, but act as one entity, increase our own bargaining power, and go to the table acting as a one entity. That's what SAG and AFTRA is doing. And oftentimes the actions from this body can in fact lead to changes in wages. In this particular case, you have a strike happening, and part of that strike, I think, is tied to this all-inclusive model. So let me show you. Okay, so this is model number 3, all-inclusive. And let's set it up. Okay, here's the quantity of labor. Okay, sorry about that, the camera was a little out of whack. Set up. So you have the quantity of labor. So So here you have the quantity of labor. This is model number 3, all inclusive quantity of labor. Here's the wage rate, okay? And we have our demand for labor that we're used to, and the supply of labor. Here is, let's call that the competitive wage. So what's going on with the all-inclusive? Rather than restrict supply, the union, let's say SAG and AFTRA for example, will say, listen, we want a higher wage. Let's call it WH for higher. We want 11% increase, and we collectively will not work unless we get this. That's the strike. We will stop working, we will picket. We are saying this is the wage we want, and we're not going to work until we get there. So what does that look like? What does it do to the market? And when you have a higher wage, okay, here's the demand for labor, let's call it A, and here's the supply of labor, let's call it B, okay? And effectively, this strike, what it's doing, when they say, AFTRA, SAG, as a body is saying, we want this particular wage. We are asking, I'm doing it from the wage perspective, that this be our new increase, 11%. We want this. This is where we are. That's what we want. And we will strike. We will not work until we get there. They're in fact changing the supply of labor. Because anything below WH, no supply. Which means the supply is this. I'm gonna put some red marks in. Anything below WH, I am not supplying. I'm only gonna supply WH and higher. So they effectively change the supply curve to this with this strike, with the all-inclusive. We will not work unless we get WH. We're gonna strike. This is what we want. So here's this new supply curve, because anything below, not happening. We're on strike. We're not working. This is what we want. But here's the new supply curve. It's effectively what they do with this all-inclusive strike model. And if you have a new supply, and where it hits the demand is right here at A, that is supposed to be the new equilibrium. So this strike is effectively using an economic principle to change the shape of the supply curve. It used to be this, and we used to be here. We want this. Anything below it, we're not working, we're striking, and this changes supply curve. So the new equilibrium is now at this point A. Here's where the new supply is the demand, that's the higher wage. An economic principle played out in what we see happening in Hollywood. It's not a movie, okay? So the labor market is interesting. The labor market has real-world implications. So what we see with this strike with the unions and AFTRA, what we see with the firms buying the labor in terms of the production and the studios, it's real economic principles at play. I hope this series of videos was helpful. I thought about it, and I wanted to use my board here to kind of explain them. Until next time, take care.